The WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, claims a personal victory as Sweden drops a long-running rape investigation against him. Appearing on the balcony at Ecuador's embassy in London, where he's lived for 5 years to avoid extradition, he says he's angry at how he's been treated.
7 years without charge. Why my children grew up without me. That is not something that I can forgive. It is not something that I can forget.
No answers on his future, but Scotland Yard says he still faces arrest for skipping bail if he leaves the embassy. Today, his alleged victim expressed her shock at the decision to drop the rape investigation and said she stood by her allegation, also on the programme. As Donald Trump heads to Saudi Arabia on his first foreign trip as president, the White House is engulfed in fresh claims about links to Russia. Theresa May is forced to defend her election pledge to scrap winter fuel payments for some pensioners as divisions open up within her party. Graveyard serial killer Stephen Port, his victims' families say they're dismayed by an inquiry's slow progress into why police took so long to catch him. And
selling, thank you, sir, for $98 million. Thank you, Yuki.
A painting by American artist Jean-Michel Basquiat, who died 30 years ago, is sold for a record-breaking price.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, England's footballers lose on penalties again. The under-17s were beaten by Spain in the final of the European Championship.
Good evening. The WikiLeaks founder, Julian Assange, says he will not forgive or forget after a 7-year rape investigation in Sweden was dropped without charge today. For almost 5 of those years, Mr. Assange has been holed up inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London to avoid extradition. But today's development doesn't mean that the 45-year-old can finally walk free. Police say they would still be obliged to arrest him if he left the embassy. And the United States may also take legal action against him for leaking secret official documents. Our correspondent Caroline Hawley has the story. Her report includes flashing images from the start.
Out into the fresh air. On the balcony of the Ecuadorian embassy, Julian Assange emerged this afternoon to have his say on the end of the Swedish investigation against him.
Today is an important victory for me and for the UN human rights system. 7 years without charge. Why my children grew up without me. That is not something that I can forgive. It is not something that I can forget.
But the prosecutor in Sweden hasn't cleared Julian Assange. She said that in his absence, she simply couldn't pursue the case any further.
The decision to discontinue the investigation is not based on an assessment of the evidence, but because we do not see possibilities to advance the investigation further, so we do not make any statement on the issue of guilt.
This complex international drama began in 2010 when 2 women alleged that Julian Assange had sexually assaulted them on a visit to Sweden, accusations he's always denied. He was detained in Britain under a European arrest warrant. In May 2012, the Supreme Court upheld a decision to extradite him to Sweden for questioning. And in June, Mr. Assange walked into the Ecuadorian embassy in London asking for political asylum. The Metropolitan Police mounted a 24-hour guard at the embassy. By October 2015, it had cost over £13 million. And it's not over yet. Julian Assange is no longer wanted on an international arrest warrant, but the police say that if he stepped out of the embassy, they're still obliged to arrest him for failing to surrender to a London court back in 2012. At the embassy this evening, his supporters were jubilant. But in Sweden, the woman who accused him of rape issued a statement saying he was evading justice and expressing her shock that the investigation was being shelved.
Julian Assange was not held without charge for 7 years. He was subject to extradition proceedings within the EU under the European arrest warrant scheme. He would have received a fair trial in Sweden had he chosen to go back. And the fact that the proceedings lasted 7 years was entirely down to him seeking refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy rather than going to face trial in a country that's governed by the rule of law.
Light them all up. Come on, fire!
It was this footage of an American helicopter shooting civilians in Iraq that first brought WikiLeaks to international attention. A flood of other state secrets followed. Julian Assange has always said it was his fear of extradition to the US that drove him through the doors of the Ecuadorian embassy.
Thanks, guys.
So despite today's dramatic twist in this long-running diplomatic and legal saga, tonight he's back inside. Not for the moment going anywhere.
We don't know if the US government is actually planning to ask for his extradition, but the US Attorney General said recently that he wanted Mr. Assange arrested. Now, Ecuador has asked Britain to give Mr. Assange safe passage. No sign of that happening. So for the moment, Julian Assange stays here. But Scotland Yard has said that there will be reduced police resources now for their operation.
Caroline Hawley, thank you. It's reported tonight that President Trump told Russian officials at the White House that firing the FBI Director James Comey had relieved the great pressure the president was under because of Russia. The New York Times says he also referred to Comey as crazy and a real nut job. Another report says a current White House official is a significant person of interest in the investigation into possible ties between Trump's presidential campaign and Russia. Well, the latest claims come as President Trump flew out of Washington on his first overseas trip. He's heading to Saudi Arabia, where he's due to meet Arab leaders before travelling on to Jerusalem and Rome. Our North America editor, John Sopel, is in Riyadh, where President Trump will arrive later. And John, what more can you tell us about these developments tonight?
Well, these are extraordinary allegations from the New York Times of what Donald Trump said in that contested meeting with Sergei Lavrov 10 days ago. He said, "I just fired the head of the FBI. He was crazy, a real nut job. I faced great pressure because of Russia. That's taken off." In other words, the pressure is removed now because he had removed James Comey. The White House has issued a statement while the president was in mid-air. Far from pushing back and saying this is nonsense, exaggerated, it says the president has always emphasised the importance of making deals with Russia. By grandstanding and politicising the investigation into Russia's actions, James Comey created unnecessary pressure on our ability to engage and negotiate with Russia. Two things very quickly. One, it makes clear that James Comey was fired because of the Russia investigation and nothing else. But secondly, it raises a question of whether the president has engaged in the obstruction of justice by halting an investigation by James Comey. And that has potentially very, very serious consequences. Now, the White House will spin that saying it's not Donald Trump trying to protect himself legally, he was trying to protect the national interest. But it is another extraordinary twist in this whole drama.
And it comes as President Trump is setting off on his first official trip abroad as president. Is all this likely to overshadow that?
The glib answer is he would love it to, but it's not going to, because of course this issue will keep on carrying on. That said, this is a highly important trip for President Trump. Despite all that he said about Muslims during the campaign, about keeping them out of America, about the responsibility of Saudi Arabia for 9/11, there is going to be the warmest of welcomes for him here, for two reasons principally. One, he's not Barack Obama, and the Saudis grew to really dislike him. I was here a year ago with Barack Obama, and it was the coolest of receptions he received. And the other reason that Donald Trump is going to receive the warmest of welcomes is because he has been taking a very tough stand on Iran. Just driving in from the airport, there were posters, billboards across the motorway, and loads of them with huge pictures of Donald Trump and King Salman saying, "Together we prevail." He will like that. He might not like some of the other reporting.
John Sopel, thank you. Divisions are opening up tonight within the Conservative Party over its manifesto commitment to means-test winter fuel payments for pensioners. The Scottish Conservative leader, Ruth Davidson, said she was in favour of retaining the payment for all pensioners in Scotland. But the Prime Minister argued it was unfair that wealthy pensioners received the money while some families were struggling. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar.
Would you trust her to keep things running or to run your economy? But has Theresa May dropped a spanner in the works by keeping people guessing about her tax and spending plans, and then keeping pensioners guessing about who'd keep and who'd lose the winter fuel allowance? She wasn't giving much away.
We will continue to ensure that the least well-off pensioners are protected. But if you look at the situation at the moment, we see well-off pensioners able to be supported with their fuel bills when struggling ordinary working families are not. I think there's a principle of fairness that underpins this.
But that's not how all Tories see it, especially Scottish Conservatives under their leader Ruth Davidson, who greeted Mrs May in Edinburgh. The Scottish Tory manifesto, published today, says social security devolution allows us to make different choices in Scotland, and so we will protect universal winter fuel payments for all older people, and they will not be subject to means testing.
We believe that there shouldn't be means testing for the winter fuel payment. The reason that we've said that is, as many of your viewers will acknowledge, Scotland has a colder climate. We also have a different amount of housing stock, and devolution allows you to make different decisions.
Mrs May's answer, she's writing policy south of the border.
As a government, we have given the Scottish Government significant powers in relation to welfare, and they make a number of decisions about various welfare benefits in Scotland.
You are a breath of fresh air.
And who knows, more voters might feel the same if Jeremy Corbyn's promise to protect the fuel allowance and pensions catches on. Labour's been attacked over tax and spending plans critics say don't add up. Now he's hitting back.
What she's done is caused a huge amount of anxiety. She hasn't said at what level she's going to change it. We think the winter fuel allowance should be kept, and it will be kept under Labour, and it will be universal.
Wow.
Just one way for the SNP to go, right at Theresa May.
Well, I think taking the winter fuel payment away from pensioners who have worked hard and paid in all their life is just wrong. You know, the winter fuel payment is not a king's ransom.
Not all Tories south of Scotland agree with Mrs May on pensioners, on policies like social care. One former minister told me they'd be opposing her except there's an election on, and that's one reason it's happening. Mrs May wants more backing for potentially unpopular decisions if public money gets tighter after Brexit, and you can bet she'd hesitate to make risky promises if she wasn't so confident of winning.
Thank you very much.
Tories look upbeat about this campaign, whether or not they always agree. But life could get tougher for them, for a lot of people afterwards, whoever wins. John Pienaar, BBC News.
The serial killer Stephen Port was jailed for life last year after he killed 4 men. Their bodies were all found outside his flat or in a churchyard nearby. Yet their deaths were not initially treated as murder, and detectives missed a number of chances to catch the killer. Now the families of the victims say they are dismayed by the slow progress of an inquiry into why police took so long to catch him. Here's our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford.
The graveyard in Barking that was Stephen Port's dumping ground for 3 of the bodies of the 4 men he killed with the date rape drug GHB. His first victim was 23-year-old Anthony Walgate, the last 25-year-old Jack Taylor. Their families have been waiting for an investigation by the Independent Police Complaints Commission into why detectives failed to spot that there was a serial killer at work for so long. But this week, they told me, their patience has run out.
I don't feel that the IPCC are in control of the investigation at all. I think it's the police dictating to what stage it goes, what pace it goes, which is disgusting. I think we had to fight the police to listen, and now we're having to do the same for the IPCC to move on to the next stage.
Stephen Port used dating apps to lure the men to his home. He then gave them lethal doses of GHB. His first victim, Anthony Walgate, was found outside the door of Port's flat. The others in or near the local churchyard over the next 15 months. The police were asked on numerous occasions if the deaths could be linked. The IPCC investigation is designed to work out why detectives were so reluctant to connect them. But 20 months on, not a single police officer has been questioned. The BBC has been told that the Independent Police Complaints Commission investigation team is itself frustrated and dismayed by the delay in interviewing the officers. I understand that's been caused by the officers, the Police Federation and their lawyers asking for more time to examine the 7,000 pages of evidence. Though in public today, the IPCC was playing down the row, saying it had agreed that the detective should have more time. The families told me they're worried that any further delays will lead to officers forgetting why they made the decisions they did.
It's like very frustrating, it's disappointing. It's like you're being let down all over again. I think we all feel that we're just being let down. You shouldn't have to keep chasing things up after everything that we've been through.
It is very, very frustrating because I really thought the IPCC would be totally independent, be more professional and a lot faster than they have been.
They want to know if police just jumped to conclusions and assumed that gay men dying from date-rape drug overdoses was something normal and not worth treating with suspicion. Daniel Sandford, BBC News.
A brief look at some of the day's other news stories now. And a former Newcastle United youth team football coach, George Ormond, has been charged with 29 historical sexual offences alleged to have taken place between 1973 and 1998. Mr Ormond, who is 61, is due to appear before magistrates next month. A man has been jailed for more than 9 years for a hit-and-run crash which killed a 4-year-old girl. Aidan McAteer lost control of the stolen car at St Helens on Merseyside. Violet Grace Ewens was killed. Her grandmother, who was carrying her at the time, suffered serious injuries. Greater Manchester Police say Moore's murderer, Ian Brady's body, should not be cremated in the city or surrounding area where he carried out his crimes out of respect to his victims' families. Brady died in prison on Monday. Now, it's been a year since the ban on so-called legal highs came into effect, but they are still available in many British cities. Known as new psychoactive substances, or SPICE, the legal highs were made Class B drugs, which meant they had to be taken off the shelves on the high street. But there are warnings that the sale of SPICE has now been driven underground, as Jeremy Cook reports.
They are new psychoactive substances, NPS.
Not so much a problem, more so an epidemic.
Known as legal highs, or SPICE.
It's got the kind of psychological addiction you might associate with crack cocaine and the physical addiction and withdrawals that you'd associate with heroin.
A year ago, they were banned.
Just because they say it's illegal don't mean that you can't get it. That just makes people more determined to get it.
In Edinburgh, the drug subculture has been all about heroin, the needle and the syringe. So here, many chose not to smoke NPS, but to inject it.
Just unbelievable. People losing their lives, people losing limbs.
Grant is homeless and alone.
That drug is the worst that I've ever experienced.
Worse than heroin?
Worse than heroin, worse than cocaine, worse than crack cocaine, worse than all of them put together. But better. It's crazy.
Get a fair bit of drug use down here.
The Street Work Charities outreach team are here to help.
How are you managing?
They've seen firsthand the devastation caused by NPS. Edinburgh was among the first cities in the UK to ban legal highs back in 2015.
Even the users that I've spoken to myself who now no longer use speak to me about how that was a terrible episode in their lives and how glad they are that the ban's come into place.
But NPS is still on the streets here, as users like Rab know.
I've lost numerous people over it, you know what I mean? It's not nice.
Friends have died, others have been left with terrible scars. The drug destroys the flesh where it's injected.
There are a few of my mates that have got holes in their legs at the moment, and that's because of illegal highs, eh?
A mega haul of seized street SPICE at the headquarters of Police Scotland's NPS unit, the only one of its kind in the UK. Each 1 gram package costs a tenner, enough here for countless hits, with a street value of hundreds of thousands of pounds. Even before the ban, Police Scotland had been working to take out assembly plants like this one, where NPS brought in from China was prepared and packaged, ready to flood the streets.
We will never arrest our way out of the issue of new psychoactive substances. And it's about informing young people of the dangers that these substances present and making sure that they make as best an informed decision as possible.
Add some solvents.
At Manchester Metropolitan University, they're preparing a report on MPS in their city.
6% of the synthetic cannabinoid.
Early conclusions are that spice dealing has been driven underground, but it's still available and extremely dangerous.
Some estimates have suggested that it's 700 times more potent than traditional forms of cannabis. As soon as you take one street dealer out, they just replace the next day with somebody else. I don't think you're going to kind of stop the street level dealing.
And if you have dealers, you have this. For the young street homeless here, spice remains a clear and present danger.
It's made vulnerable people more vulnerable, people turning on each other, people who smoke together are now selling to each other, stealing from each other, people are being put out to beg in order to pay for the spice habit. It's just made things 100 times worse.
For Beth, the ban on legal highs has been irrelevant. She's clean now, but just a couple of months ago, this 22-year-old single mum was on the streets and on the spice.
Didn't wash, didn't clean my hair, didn't care about nothing, wasn't bothered. Just took everything away.
Banning it doesn't work. What might work?
I think you need to up the mental health and that. There's a reason why people are wanting to smoke it, not just because it's banned, not because it's legal, not because it's illegal. There's a problem with that person. Like, they can't deal with their thoughts.
A year in then, the ban is having mixed success. Spice is no longer on sale in high street shops, but the young and the homeless are still finding it, still learning that a new kind of high comes with a new kind of low. Jeremy Cook, BBC News, Manchester.
Voting has finally ended tonight in Iran's presidential elections after polling stations had to be kept open much longer than they were meant to be because of an unexpectedly high turnout. Long queues formed across the country where the relatively moderate President Hassan Rouhani is facing a strong challenge from a hardline conservative rival. The results are due out tomorrow. Our Middle East editor, Jeremy Bowen, has this assessment of how the outcome could affect Iran's future.
People are encouraged to vote in Iran because it gives the system legitimacy. But the election, as ever, isn't free because the candidates have to be approved by the unelected Guardian Council. It's looking like a close race between the main candidates. At this polling station, they were supporting Hassan Rouhani, the current president.
I want social justice, social freedoms and political development, and good relations with all countries in the world.
We will stand in these queues for as long as it's needed in order not to go backwards, for the shadow of the war not to hang over people's heads.
Iranian elections, with all their flaws, produce vigorous campaigns and moments of political openness. Candidates have traded accusations of corruption and criticized Iran's security policies, remarks that at other times could land Iranians in jail.
Iranians don't seem particularly enthused by the candidates. For many, it's a choice between bad and worse. The main challenger is Ebrahim Raisi. He is a veteran conservative hardliner. He's deeply suspicious of the West, and if he wins, there could be crises ahead. President Hassan Rouhani wants to have another term. He's a moderate who'd like more openness in politics and society. Rouhani was elected last time because he promised better relations with the outside world and the relaxation of economic sanctions through making a deal about Iran's nuclear plans.
President Rouhani is running on the success of the deal, in which Iran accepted restrictions on its nuclear industry. If he loses, it's because voters think he's handling the economy badly. Raisi opposed the nuclear deal when it was being negotiated, but now says he'd keep it, though he insists his toughness will make sure Iran stays strong.
Whoever is going to be the next Iranian president, be it Hassan Rouhani or Ebrahim Raisi, this can change the tenor of Iranian politics, its ability to dialogue with the international community and the West, particularly the United States, and also its relationship with its neighbors in the region.
Whoever wins will have to work with the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. In Iran, he has the power and the last word. Viewed from Tehran, the country is a regional power with legitimate security interests and the right to help allies like the Syrian regime. But that alarms its adversaries, especially the US, the Saudis and Israel, and that won't change. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News.
Back to the election now, and the UK's vote to leave the EU was seen by some as an indication that many feel immigration and globalisation has changed communities too quickly, with British, or in some cases English, values under threat. In the Last of Us series about the new politics, our correspondent Alex Forsyth reports from two different locations on the English south coast, which have seen significant economic and social change, and asks how it might factor in the general election.
Scattered along Kent's coastline, seaside towns once host to hordes of English tourists. Much of the old charm has faded. There is some regeneration, but these traditional communities have seen undeniable change. The indoor bowlers of Margate have borne witness to the town's transformation.
Margate from the 70s, it's changed so much. It's beyond recognition, really. There's so many immigrants have come in and they've congregated in one area.
Do you think people still feel this is a real English town?
No, because every shop has got Indians running them, and there's Polish shops, there's Afghanistan shops, which is fine. Now, I've got nothing against that, but it's pushing the English traditions out of our lives.
This part of town is home to many EU migrants. B&Bs and boarding houses have become flats. Shops cater to new tastes. Barry Gardiner's Barbers has been here nearly 30 years. Many of his customers backed Brexit to assert their national identity.
I think a lot of people have felt they've been hard done by, really, don't you, Sid? And the borders, I think, have been too much, let too many people in, of course.
They are.
It's made a big difference.
They don't realise England's only a small country in Ireland.
The EU referendum, the question of Britain's place in the world, and to some extent talk of Scotland's place in the UK, has raised issues of culture and identity, and it's left many seeking someone who will stand up for them, their society, their community and their way of life.
Along the coast, Southampton too has changed. It's a multicultural city. The busy port is still key to the local economy. But shipbuilding and manufacturing no longer dominate. In the suburban streets, it's not just immigration, but also job insecurity and rising house prices that have altered neighbourhoods and left some feeling unsettled by the pace of change, wanting their values recognised and voices heard. Like the members of this local choir, they epitomise community spirit, but fear beyond the church hall, that's fragmenting as people try to get on with getting by.
For a lot of young people who are, in fairly good jobs, unless you have a couple with a fairly substantial income, their chances of actually getting on the property ladder are really slim.
And it does affect communities a lot because you, as you say, that cohesion is missing a bit. People feel more isolated.
People will work further away from where they live, so that their colleagues are spread out different places, their families spread out different places.
If anything, there's more sort of division in our society at the moment as a result of recent political decisions that have been made, and I feel the society as a whole has become much more polarised. I think in a way we kind of have to create our own communities now.
In this election, who can speak to these communities might dictate who gets to shape the future of the country. It seems old values still matter in the new politics. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Southampton.
The American artist Jean-Michel Basquiat came to prominence as a graffiti artist in the 1970s. He died at the age of just 27 from a heroin overdose almost 30 years ago. Now, one of his works has just sold at auction for $110 million, a record for any American artist. So what's behind the phenomenal demand for his work? Here's our arts editor, Will Gompertz.
$57 million, $58 million.
The moment is about to arrive.
at Sotheby's last night.
65 million on the telephone now.
When the American neo-expressionist painter Jean-Michel Basquiat, who died nearly 30 years ago,
Is that a bid, sir? $69 million now.
hit the big time.
The hammer is up, sir. I'm selling on this side of the room. It's Yuki's bid, a fair warning, and selling, thank you, sir, for $98 million. Thank you, Yuki. Congratulations.
The sale price, when commissions are included, puts him in the exclusive auction house $100 million+ club,
Thank you very, very much indeed.
along with Pablo Picasso and Francis Bacon.
We definitely had an idea that everybody felt that it was a masterpiece, but the air gets pretty thin at those sort of levels, financially. So, of course, the record price, the previous record price was, less than half what we've achieved this evening. So, you're going into very new territory ultimately.
The buyer, Yusaku Miyazawa, a Japanese online fashion retailer, was delighted, he said, at winning this masterpiece, which is great. But why might he have been willing to pay so much?
It's the kind of rock and roll way he put images and text together is extremely influential. That mixed with a kind of expressionistic style of painting, added to the fact that he's a black American artist, it's a kind of explosive mix. Okay, Andy Warhol.
To that, you could add the now almost mythical nature of Basquiat's short life, which was immortalised and romanticised in this biopic with his friend and mentor Andy Warhol, played by David Bowie, who himself became a collector of the one-time street artist's work.
That sounds good. That's new.
Whatever one thinks of the eye-watering auction price paid for the work, there is no question that Jean-Michel Basquiat fits into the story of modern art. His paintings reference the so-called low art or Jean de Buffet. There's something I find quite alarming about that picture, and the expressionism of Vincent van Gogh and the street art scene of 1970s New York. He is a significant figure in the canon. Of course, nobody knows whether his paintings can sustain $100 million prices, but given most are still held privately, the chances are we'll find out fairly soon. Will Gompertz, BBC News.
And that's it from us. Good night.